Hello. Oh, great. Yeah, so thank you for enduring that very long title of this presentation today. We'll try to keep it snappier than that. Um, so we've heard an overview of I think some of the core concepts of trust frameworks from Don and Tom, and that was really helpful. We've heard about some of the approach in Jersey, not New Jersey. I'm actually from New Jersey, so my ears perked for a moment. Um, so it's great to hear what's happening in Jersey. So what we want to do now is take you to Canada and have a look at the way that we're looking at some of these same types of challenges and opportunities in Canada. And I'll start first off with just a quick note that this July will be the 150th anniversary birthday of Canada. So yay for that. And uh, so if you're not familiar with how the governance structure of Canada, it's basically a collection of 13 provinces and territories that agreed to work together to confederate to become a country. And so they had these 13 regions that had their own sets of priorities and their own needs, and some of them wanted railroads and some of them wanted other things, and through this negotiation, they achieved confederation and they became the country of Canada. So I think that is important because I think that it also speaks to the concept of federation and cooperation as a key element to how we look at solving these problems and these challenges within Canada. So federation is very natural to us, as well as the idea that we will not have one single identifier in Canada because of this this confederated governance, as we have 14 roots of identity, roots within the provinces if you're born in Canada, if you're an immigrant like me, roots with the federal government as your legal identity root. So that's important for us, and how we look at the space and how we address the challenges and opportunities. So a quick quote from our Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau. We released the Canadian budget in April, and the thought there is that Canada can be a world leader in digital innovation, but we can't afford not to be a leader. So the government is federal, provincial, territorial governments recognize just how important this space is and the work that we have to do. To give you a little bit about the DIACC and who we are as an organization. In 2010, after the financial market crash, global financial market crashes, the Minister of Finance, Minister Flaherty at the time, called for a payments task force review to be created. They recognized that there was a need to review the payment systems in Canada and make sure they were up to speed, providing the most innovative, safe, secure, privacy-respecting solutions for all of Canadians. That task force met for, I think it was about 3 years. They came up with 3 very specific recommendations. The third recommendation is the one that is, I think, most critical for us in the DIACC, which was to propel the development of a digital ID and authentication framework. This was, I think, about 2013. This recognition, rightly so, of the payments task force that to have the most innovative, safe, secure, privacy-respecting payment system has to start with identity. And to the credit of that group as well, one of the at least a few of the participants in that group, they realized that that's actually true for just about every time we want to deliver a service of value, whether it's to citizens or e-commerce. And so identity really is the kind of the cornerstone of delivering these kinds of services. And so we have this recognition in Canada that if we can get digital ID right, we can move and grow Canada's GDP. It has to be based on interoperability of Canadian principled standards for innovation solutions and services. And I think this is a really critical point because having been a participant in the U.S. NSTIC and IDESG and Kantara and participated in other programs around the world, I think something that I recognized within how we approach this in Canada was that we actually don't necessarily look at it as identity as what we're trying to achieve. Our focus is on enabling Canada's participation in the digital economy, our full, secure, beneficial participation in the digital economy. And by having the digital economy as our central focal point for what we want to achieve to grow in Canada, this has really enabled the public and private sectors to fully commit and work together towards this vision. So again, as so often we know, identity is really the key to unlock so many opportunities. And so for us, it's that focus on the digital economy that I think that has made all the difference. So the DIACC was formed in 2014. The mission is to identify and develop standards for verifiable interoperability. Thanks for calling out interoperability, Steve, earlier. To promote adoption of digital ID solutions, as well as to develop Canadian IP and workforce. So we recognize that the workforce in Canada, we need to help support that workforce as well moving forward. So, again, I think what we heard from some of our other presenters around Jersey was that, why not adopt something that already exists? And I think that that's actually a very fair question. So, this said, we've scanned and reviewed all of the types of approaches around the world, and there are so many great approaches. And what we need to recognize about identity is that it is cultural. So a system that may work very well in one region and be very appropriate for one region, it may not work as well in another. And so for us, we feel that we have some specific areas of strength that we want to focus upon. We're large enough to be significant, but small enough to be agile. We have the public and private sector committed to the vision, as well as the spirit of cooperation. We also have built into the regulatory schemes through PPADA privacy protection for our citizens and our residents. And privacy by design, which came out of Canada as well. So we need to recognize all of those particular areas of strength, strategic strength that we want to leverage to help advance our solution, and see if we can also contribute into this world space of the varying types of approaches that are happening around the world. So again, cooperation and collaboration, I think, is critical to our quest to enable Canada's best participation in the digital economy. And so we are a league of members. We have members from the public and the private sector that participate within the DIACC, and it's growing all the time. And one thing that I do find interesting, so the title of this group is Pragmatic Government, and it's kind of interesting when we've been seated in these workshops, when we're outside of Canada, we tend to get placed into the government track. When we're inside of Canada, sometimes people think we're the private sector only. But what's really interesting for the DIACC is we truly are, because we came out of this payments task force that was called upon by the federal Minister of Finance, we really are a representation of both of those interests of the public and private sector. So even at the board of director level, we have federal governments, federal government departments, provincial governments sitting next to banks, software providers. So it really is a amalgamation of those sets of priorities aimed towards the digital economy. Now, we talked about a trust framework, and we like to think of our trust framework as our set of Canadian principled standards that help us achieve our goal. I love to use this XKCD cartoon because all of us who work in this space, I think, know how many hours of conversation go into making these kinds of standards happen. And what I love so much about this cartoon is that all of this work that we're doing is to remove complexity for the end user. So it takes a fair amount of work and collaboration to remove that complexity from the end user and make it easy for them to participate in a privacy-enhancing, secure, and user-centric ecosystem. So I do focus on verifiable interoperability. So interoperability is very important for us. We have set 10 Canadian principles, so all of the work that we do is influenced by as you'll know, privacy by design, making sure that we have a scalable, open, cost-effective, competitive, and internationally interoperable ecosystem that Canadians can participate in. So these are our 10 principles that we bring into everything that we do within the DIACC. And we like to think about, in terms of interoperability, we like to think about it as verifiable interoperability, moving toward the setting of the business legal technical standards, and then applying Trustmark to those verified participants within that ecosystem. And so verifiable interoperability is very critical for us in our pan-Canadian approach. I think this is probably one of my favorite slides because I think one of the things that might be slightly, the perspective that we're taking within Canada is a slightly different, that we're focused on verification of people, verification of organizations, and those verifiable digital relationships that connect people and connect organizations. And so this kind of trifecta of a holistic view, I think is something that's very important for us. And I think it also comes back to our founding view that this is about enabling Canada's participation in the digital economy. Identity is the key to that. And how do we participate in the digital economy? It's not just a verified identity as a kind of a blip on a radar. You interact with organizations, you interact with governments, you interact with companies. And so to have this real trusted ecosystem, we have to look at all of those pieces: verification of people, organizations, and the digital relationships between them. So just a quick view into some of the more standards-based work that we're doing. We have 3 core components that we're focused on. One is a trusted digital identity. And so this is the foundation of how you verify a person. I'll also note that in our ecosystem, I think we heard some other models looking at AMBA and in the U.S. What's happening around the world. We do have a notion that provincial governments can act as verified attribute providers, and so I think when you have a cultural and governance-based ecosystem that enables governments to participate and underpin that trust, whether it's pinging a database of some sort or like Passport or otherwise, I think that's a really core component, and so that's part of what the governments are bringing in to this ecosystem, as well as things like bank ID that have been verified through KYC and otherwise. So we've got your basis of verification, as well as the binding notice and consent. And something else that I'll mention is that we've tried to take an approach that is componentized, and so we want to honor and recognize each of these distinct processes. So consent is its own standard, and of course that leverages in from great work of UMA and great work that's happening around the world. And so the way that we're really looking at it is separate these pieces out and honor them into specific standards. Leverage your learnings from the great work of NIST and the great work on the GPGs. And so we've really learned from those iterations, and in our Canadian view, we think componentization is going to be the key, so that we don't have to worry about being locked into whether it's SAML or OpenID or FIDO. We have a scalable ecosystem that can evolve as the technologies evolve, and so this componentization is very critical, I think, for us. So the second piece of the work that we're doing as the standards work is the trusted access and authorization. This is all about access and authorization. So we've got a set of distinct standards for delegation, access, authorization, entitlements, and resources that need to be accessed. And so this is a strong piece of work. Our trusted identity pieces, we're working to bring out the core of that 2017. At the end of the year, our trusted access, we're working to advance our drafts there for 2018. So that work is moving forward as well. And underpinning every piece that we've just talked about is what we call trusted infrastructure. And the trusted infrastructure is the components that are necessary to underpin every single action and behavior that happens in this ecosystem. So security, privacy, audit logging. So we have this trusted infrastructure really as providing the basis to this entire picture of our standards process. Now, we do have the concept of the trust mark, I think as Don and Tom had mentioned earlier. So we will have a scalable certification program that will work towards international, verifiable international interoperability. So we've got lots of great partners and opportunities to determine how exactly will we map the work that we're doing alongside the great approaches that are happening in the UK and in Jersey and in New Zealand and around the world and in the US, of course, as well. So partnerships are key. And we've heard, I think we've heard a few points about some of the hubs that are developing around the world. And so great news for Canada. We've had an authentication hub for access to federal government services. That's been in place for, I think, over 5 years now. And you'll see that that is a citizen to government approach. It has a double blinding process, and so it's incredibly privacy respecting in that sense. And I think that was the double blinding has really created a robust solution for an authentication hub there. And that's one place where you can say, really the privacy by design and the PPADA and the privacy regulations actually push that solution to be more robust and more scalable in other places. So that solution is already in place, and it does a great job for authentication, leveraging bank ID and also a government ID as a last resort, as well as the blinding, so the relying party at the government never knows which identity provider you came from. The identity provider never knows which government relying party that you went to. And this is fabulous, but again, we want to get to this ecosystem approach. And so we want to think about how people interoperate, and we are citizens, we are consumers, we are workers, we are moms, we are all so many things, and so we want this ecosystem to be user-centric, and so we have to start thinking about all of the players in an ecosystem and how they can contribute into this ecosystem and the different types of value that they will derive out of this ecosystem approach. So it really does take a village. And with that, we at the DIACC do work internationally, and so we have some liaisons with many partners, and one of those liaisons is with University, Rutgers University in New Jersey, in fact, as well as University of Washington. And what we're able to do through these liaisons is actually have the ability to enable the exportation of Canadian principled solutions. And I would focus on the principles as well, because again, if you remember, privacy by design really drove that robust solution of that authentication hub. And so we believe that our principles will drive more and more innovative approaches. And so through this program, we're able to export, help deliver and export Canadian principled solutions. This was a up to $800,000 US grant that was awarded to the DIACC through SecureKey to help to implement their new approach. And I hope you were at Andre's session on Tuesday, because it was really good, and he talked all about that. And so if you haven't seen that, grab Andre and talk about what they're doing. But again, I think if we think about authentication hubs as being solid foundations, where we're moving is to a verified attribute sharing network with participants from the government and the private sector working together, all with the user at the center and with control. And what's great about that as well, and what I love about this model is that the model actually enables a ledgered recording of consent events. And so we can also start to think about controlling consent over time and revocation. And so when we bring all of these pieces together in one true ecosystem, we can start to solve these problems with less friction and with more agility. So that's some work that's happening in Canada. It's had buy-in from the banks. It has the governments has recently achieved 27 million in funding, particularly for this modeling, as well as for the applied research that's happening. So lots of movement in Canada. And the other work that we're doing in the DIACC is we deliver proof of concepts. And so if you go to diac.ca now, you will see our latest proof of concept that is available from the front page. And you can access our white paper. We have a short video, as well as you can go to our Git repo and grab the code. And so this particular proof of concept was working with corporate registries and understanding how we could enable corporate registries to share information and play their role within the ecosystem. And so because we started with that holistic view, now you'll understand, why are we talking about corporate ID? Because that's important for the trust layer of the digital economy. So this proof of concept was proposed by the province of British Columbia and IBM. And in that proof of concept, they worked to leverage, they wanted to see if Hyperledger could provide some value to corporate registries to share information. They have a number of agreements and initiatives, even within Canada, to create economic regions and enable better bargaining and access to resources. So we did a 2-day design workshop, and out of the 2-day design workshop, the group decided that a viewer should be created because that's what we wanted to enable. We have all of this data, and in Canada we have 14 possible corporate registries. I was trying to figure out how this all works in the US. I think it's done in Bradstreet, but and then in other countries they have one federal corporate registry. So again, cultural differences. And so what we were able to achieve with a 2-week sprint was some code that's available on GitHub that people can download and play with if they like, but it creates a viewer and gives access to data. So I actually have a demo that's on here as well that I can show you guys. But this is a critical piece, raising that data up, helping us to verify the trusted organizations who should be participating in this ecosystem, binding directors and officers and people who can act on behalf of corporations. And what we found in this journey was, believe it or not, the corporate registries world have their own conferences and do their own things, and so they're an entire silo of excellence of the work that they're doing. And we realized that personal identity people and corporate identity people had not intermingled specifically for a purpose, not that we could find. So leveraging design workshopping again, we learned that actually corporations don't perform transactions for themselves. It's somebody who is performing a transaction on behalf of a corporation. And so when that realization came out of the workshop, we saw the eyes light up and say, oh wow, this is an identity thing, and we all share these common challenges and opportunities. So again, out of that, we're able to connect this view of verified people, verified organizations, verified digital relationships, participation from governments, private sector, all with the user at the center, with privacy respecting, access control, and consent that's really all about them and what they're comfortable with. So what we're working to do is underpin real-world innovation that works for Canadians with the Canadian principled standards work that's happening in the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework, and all of that in working with our international partners and collaborators to share our findings and what we've found, and also to bring in some of what's happening around the world so that hopefully we can get to a place of international interoperability. And quite frankly, I think we saw something around 10 years in the last presentation for an internationally interoperable digital ID. I'm going to challenge us because I think we can do it in much faster than 10 years. I think we've not had all of the solutions and thinking that we do now, which is why I think now is a really exciting time to be working in digital ID. So how did I do in my time, Zach?
Good. We got a couple minutes for questions.
Awesome.
Questions? None?
None.
I don't know if this is more of a question. I'm curious about the grant that you guys got. I know, Andre, this might be more of a question for you that I should have asked on Tuesday. What are you guys trying to do with the grant from DHS S&T?
So I'm going to let Joni lead, and I'll add more color. But so this is It is a grant to DIACC, and Security's participating with DIACC to bring this thing to life. But I'm going to let Joni talk about it first, and then I'll add color to it. So why don't you start, Joni?
Yeah, so the grant was focused on building a implementation of a digital identity ecosystem that had what we were kind of calling distributed privacy. So if we were looking at could we leverage distributed network modeling with elements of blockchain, Hyperledger, to build a network that enables participants to actually be at the center of that network and to derive their value, just as participants will derive their value as well. So if you think about Hyperledger, and I know there's dogma of blockchain and what is and what isn't, but Hyperledger is the permission chain. So only those who are trusted participants can come into that network. So if you think about, very familiar analogs like Visa, not just anyone can issue a Visa card. You have to go through the verifiable interoperability to be able to issue a Visa card. The same way in the concept of this network is to be a participant, you have to be verified as trusted. And then once you are in the network, you can ask for a particular piece of information, and then I can get that request, and I can say, actually, I'm going to let the bank verify that question that you have of me, or I'm going to ask the government to verify what you have of me, and actually not sharing the information, but verifying it. So, was I close?
So just add a little bit more color to that. When you heard me talk the other day about the genesis of why we went the direction we did, we were responsible for constructing and operating for the U.S. government the Connect.gov service. And concurrently, there was the UK Verify service that was operating. There was an academic research paper that was written in 2015 criticizing both the hubs, and the title of the paper was On Mending Two Nation-Scale Identity Systems. It was a very obscure title, but it was published in privacy proceedings, and the essential criticism that got leveled in the paper is that if you had an honest but curious broker, they could peek. To paraphrase, if the NSA wanted all the data, they could get it. And so that led to a large discussion in the community about how are we going to build a brokerless identity system so nobody can peek in the middle. And so that really drove our thinking. We'd invented this idea of triple blind privacy in Canada. We knew how to do it for authentication. The challenge was how to do it for identity. The Canadian model for authentication has a broker in the middle. For authentication, we found a way to blind everybody so nobody got too much info, but we didn't know how to do it for identity, because as soon as the broker saw the stuff, they saw the stuff. And that's actually what the criticism was of Connect.gov. And so we thought about how to do this. We could have done it with PKI. Like that was, we get that, why blockchain? Just use PKI. The problem is with PKI is the receiver has to check the signature of the sender, which kills blinding. So can't do that. So we thought about maybe we put a key escrow agent. So if somebody in the middle does a key exchange, so the receiver just talks to the notary, and the notary says, yep, this was real. So that way they don't get to see who the sender was. So technically possible, but an operational hairball trying to kind of do all of this. And if we ever had to go back and revisit the transaction because the consumer said it wasn't me, we'd have no way to do it because it's too dynamic. And so that put us on a hunt to figure out how to do triple blind identity. And so that's what we've achieved with this next thing. And so when Anil saw it, he said, hey, this is really cool. We've found a way now to do triple blind identity to solve this broker thing that got leveled in that academic paper. So that's what drove the thinking, and that's why Anil was interested in it, because it overcame the criticism of what happened with Connect.gov.
Great, thanks. Other question?
So I have a question related somewhat to this. It's related to data sovereignty and some of the legislation that's in place to prevent PII from transferring across borders, particularly with regards to how cloud infrastructures are coming up. The majority of cloud infrastructure is still in the States, and although there are data centers popping up all over Canada and elsewhere in the world, there seems to be not very firm guarantees that the data won't necessarily cross a border for backup purposes or other things like that. Have you guys looked into that and made any decisions or workshops around that?
I'll let Andre grab that.
Yeah, we definitely encountered that with the government of Canada. That it was a contract requirement. We had to be able to demonstrate and prove that the data stayed resident in Canada. So we constructed a service that did exactly that. Funnily enough, was when we went to do Connect.gov, the U.S. government basically said the same thing. You're not doing this from Canada. We want it over here, right? And so what we've seen is that this data sovereignty thing comes up over and over again. And it's going to continue to be important. And I think that's actually a good requirement. No government wants to be beholden to a foreign corporation on citizen data. So we need to have this local in every country. That's just, table stakes to make this work. And so in the jurisdictions we're talking to so far, all of them have at least one provider who can do this locally. But we're seeing even the big companies like Amazon start to recognize that they want it local. And so they're actually being compliant in doing this. And so that's going to help. So from an operations point of view, this data sovereignty thing is really important. But from a user point of view, we do need to be able to go across borders. And so one of the things we're working on, Dayak, Joni hasn't covered this one yet, but we're doing another proof of concept that's launching soon, where we're going to use an IDP, so somebody in UK can open a bank account in Canada in such a way it'll meet the KYC obligations of a bank in Canada for opening a bank account here. It's just a proof of concept, but it's trying to lay the framework in place. What would we have to have in place to make that happen? So we do want to do trans-border when it comes to user transactions, but from a government and operational data sovereignty point of view, it's got to stay in country.
Yeah, and that POC again leverages all the good work of the banks and the KYC as well as the trust frameworks in place. So it's all about leveraging what we have and respecting the local cultures and regulations at the same time.
On that subject of interoperability with other countries, did you look to other countries than UK? Because EU, for instance, there's EIDAS regulation that promotes that interoperability between the European countries. Do you look at that, and do you work with them?
Absolutely. So we're very abreast on what's happening with the EIDAS. So that is a big part of the picture as well. When we're thinking about international interoperability, we know that there's no appetite for the EIDAS to do pairwise agreements outside of the European Union. So we're looking at how we can build the real cases around that and conform with what we have with what's already existing with where the EIDAS has gone. So I think the EIDAS also does bring in these elements of organizational trust as well in their own way. So I think that there's a lot of commonality there as well. So we absolutely have an eye on that. And we have monthly sync-ups with the privacy commissioners as well in Canada. And so we know that there's I believe that there's work underway to map where regulatory-wise we sit against GDPR versus PIPEDA in Canada. So we have that benefit of having that privacy regulation baked in already. So the government is helping us to identify how close or how far off we are with GDPR.
Just to build on that, though, the thing we did with UK was opportunistic. It was just an opportunity to present, and we say, this is really cool. We want to do this trans-border thing. So it's not exclusive. Bring your use cases. We want to do more international interop. So bring your use cases. We want to do it. We're ready. We're equipped to play, and we'll find others or jurisdictions who want to do it too.
All right, I think we're going to need to set up for the 11:15 for
Okay, thanks, guys.
Brown.